I'm for a neighborly tip from Jackson Water. Is it okay to pour fats, oils, and greases down the drain if I run hot water?
No!
What if I run the garbage disposal?
No!
How about if I use dish soap at the same time?
No!
Instead, hang on to a few containers to store and toss old cooking fat and grease once you're done. Jackson Water. Water for all the time.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Wlbt Plus. My name is Kara Shirley. I am your digital news desk host, and I am joined by our investigative reporter, our lead investigative reporter, CJ LeMaster. And CJ, you had a follow-up story that you did this past week that is pretty, the numbers and the information that you shared in it is kind of scary and staggering.
It's scary. It's some would say inexcusable.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we, frankly, when we were doing this story, hoped would have been better than our previous investigation. We looked at AMR, which is the ambulance provider here in Hinds County, last year to see how they were performing. And somebody's saying they can't hear me.
Uh-oh. Try that now.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Sorry about that.
No, it's my bad.
That's a little technical difficulty. Thank you, AJ, for letting us know.
Yes, thank you.
So from CJ to AJ. So AMR, we had hoped that things would be better after our previous investigation. We had looked at AMR, American Medical Response, which is the ambulance provider for Hinds County.
Mm-hmm.
And we had looked at their response times. We had heard reports of people who had instances where the ambulance took more than an hour to get there, or an hour and a half. Those were kind of anecdotal. You can't really tell a lot by just little one-offs here and there. And so my colleague Anthony Warren and I went through 4 months worth of response times to see just how bad it was. We didn't know what we were going to see. We know that AMR is required to respond on time in 85% of its calls, its most serious calls.
How do they classify on time?
On time in the city of Jackson and Clinton is within 8 minutes. On time in the city of Byram is within 12 minutes, I believe. And anywhere else in rural Hinds County, 18 minutes.
Okay.
So those are the parameters. And the most serious calls we're talking about are called priority 1 calls. Those would be like the most detrimental, most life-threatening. What we found were that AMR's response times were far below that 85% threshold. And so we did that story. We had hoped that doing that story would encourage improvement.
Mm-hmm.
We had even gotten AMR to sit down with us because we had data and information that was irrefutable. It looks like it's gotten worse.
Wow. Seriously
worse, like dramatically worse. And so that is incredibly disconcerting. I'm a Hinds County resident. Nearly 250,000 people are Hinds County residents. We pay for this service.
Mm-hmm.
This service is not performing as it should. And then the other side of that is that, okay, well, how do we keep AMR within? Who's supposed to hold them accountable? Who's supposed to keep them in line? Well, the county is.
Hinds County.
Hinds County. Is the county doing that? No.
Wow.
And so that is where that frustration turns into, even more. It's like, man, what's going on here? And so you can't really, you could fault AMR from the standpoint of not responding on time, but you really have to look at very seriously at the county for not finding them as they're required to do in the contract. And we'll talk about that in these stories. And the biggest thing is that if you have times that go below 85% for 3 consecutive months, it constitutes an event of default. It means that the contract is in default with the county.
Right.
That has happened multiple times from our investigations, and yet the county has not done anything about it. And so you have to wonder why that is happening. And when we talk about this accountability and people we tried to talk to from the county who, again, would not talk to us, and except through statements, and one man who dodged our calls, didn't answer, didn't respond to our calls and our emails, for more than a month, actually over the course of 2 months. You know what? Just tell us that you can't comment.
Right.
Tell us that you are looking into it. Give us some sort of hope that you're trying to do something about it. When you go silent, it looks it's the worst it can look.
Yes.
And, AMR did not talk to us for this latest story. We went back and forth with their PR person, who's a former journalist, for more than a month, for more than a month. I say for over a matter of weeks. And whenever I told her that some of the information that she was telling me in these emails could be used in a story, she clammed up and said, we have no further comment.
Let's go ahead and play the first part of the story, the investigative story that CJ did for you. Of course, this is Taken for a Ride, and it's how AMR is failing you as a Hinds County resident.
Yeah.
We just had a citizen pull up to the station and report an accident. We're going to need AMR at this location.
It's September 1st, 9:10 p.m. on North Flagchapel Road. 33-year-old Cliff Davis just got thrown from his four-wheeler after witnesses say a car pulled out in front of him.
Cliff kept saying, "Ma'am, I can't feel my legs. I can't feel my legs."
When Cliff's father arrived, he knew his son needed surgery fast. The accident tore off parts of Cliff's lower leg, and he was losing blood.
When you see your child like that in pain and you can't help him, I'd have put him in my truck and took him myself. But if I'd have moved him myself, then he'd have been in more danger.
AMR serves as the only contracted ambulance provider in Hinds County. It's required to respond to emergency calls in Jackson in 8 minutes. How long did it end up taking AMR to get there?
It was over an hour. I feel like if they would have got him there sooner or whatever, they probably could have saved the leg, So, because every minute counts.
Every minute counted to Jim Mabus, too. He waited nearly 70 minutes for AMR to take him to the hospital.
We live in a civilized country, and to wait almost an hour and a half for life-saving ambulance services is not, it's inexcusable.
Mabus died 1 week after the incident in May of 2023, prompting his family to file a wrongful death suit against AMR, where they plan to use findings from our reporting. Those findings we first unveiled last September, that AMR responds on time in maybe half of its most serious calls. Its contract requires it to arrive on time in 85%. So we wanted to see if these problems got better after our in-depth reporting. We poured through thousands of these logs, stretching from November of last year to February of this year in every Hinds County jurisdiction. We discovered AMR's response times had plunged even more than when we first exposed the company's failings. Average response time that's supposed to be 85%, the response time rate dropped to 37.6%. So 1 in 3 ambulances makes it on time in the city of Jackson.
Yeah. As mayor of the city, this is absolutely horrifying. Just as a resident in the city, this makes me concerned for my loved ones, concerned for my family. Clinton's average response times dropped this time around too. On average, responding on time just 24% of the time. In Byram, it's 26%.
See, I didn't realize that.
Well, how frustrating is it that we just had this conversation last year?
I would thought that they would think, well, they're watching us. That's what I would think. They're watching my company, so I need to speed up a little bit.
But the evidence we've found shows the company hasn't been doing that.
My first goal is an invitation. It's an invitation to talk about this. It's an invitation for us to get this right, so that we don't have to threaten lawsuits. We don't have to threaten any of those things. But I think what you present is clear, CJ. You present something that is a problem. You present an opportunity for improvement. And so we should all be motivated by that opportunity.
So he's presenting an opportunity. That's what Mayor Lumumba just said there. But I want to go back to the first person, or the woman who said that we live in a civilized country.
Yeah.
It took 1.5 hours. I'm sorry. We are 1.5 hours for an ambulance to arrive.
Well, and she said at the time it was an hour and a half. The legal documents that were filed as part of this wrongful death suit indicated that it was closer to 70 minutes. I just for point of clarity, I want to make sure, because again, she said that in there, and which is why it was important that we put that other stuff out there to make sure that we're not trying to pile on to AMR. But still, anything over the 8 minutes that it was required.
Right.
And when you have medical conditions that can worsen over time,
Mhm.
Her ex-husband died a week after he was in the ICU from this. And, they are pursuing a lawsuit against AMR. Others have filed suit in the past. AMR is a national company. AMR is in more than a dozen counties in Mississippi. In Hinds County, and this is where it gets even more, and we didn't even get into this in the story, but I'd say most of AMR's calls, of the calls to 911,
Mhm.
aren't even counted. They're not even counted at all, because they're the things called exclusions or exemptions. If you have severe weather, which could make it harder for an ambulance to get there on time, if they're blocked by a train or traffic, road closures, if they have the wrong address, if there are too many calls out at one time, any calls that are affected by these things, the fact that they arrive late doesn't count against the company. So even when you take away more than half of the calls, they still can't arrive on time.
When there is nothing that should be blocking them from arriving on time, they still are not arriving on
And we
time.
had some people that were, I saw some various Facebook posts where people were saying, well, sometimes they just get calls from people that are unnecessary and crank calls and all that other stuff, and they don't even know where to go. And I'm like, well, those don't even count against them. They're not even being counted.
Right.
So I want to give an example, and I didn't harp on this in the story, but probably the biggest, most egregious example we saw was in the city of Byram. Byram, in the month of December, almost 11% of AMR's calls arrived on time. It's supposed to be 85%, but it was close to 11%.
Wow. So
you had 90 something calls come in. You had 60 of those, I think roughly 55, 60 calls that didn't count against the company for whatever reason, exempted. Okay. Of the 29 calls that came in, for you to fit and hit 85%, 25 of those have to be on time. 3 were.
Wow.
3
out of 25.
Out of 25 calls. That's for the city of Byram. And so, you wonder why this is. AMR has told us in the past, and you'll see it this. You won't see it in this next story, so it's good that I'm mentioning it now, because there were parts of the story when we're showing these where I was on camera when we did it last week, and so we have to throw some of this stuff out there to make sure we properly set everything up. But because AMR didn't talk to us this time around, I can tell you what they told us last year. They said that there were staffing challenges. They said that there's something called wall time, which is when somebody is taken to the hospital and they're having to wait, as they say, on the wall to be able to release their patient. And if they're backed up, if there's other ambulances in front of them, they, by law, have to stay with that patient until that patient's released to the hospital's custody.
Right, yes.
And so sometimes that wall time can be 40, 50, 60 minutes. And so those are instances where an ambulance isn't free to go and pick up the next person. So there are extenuating circumstances. But again, in many of these calls, especially when there's peak hours, I think when there's more than, I don't know if it's 7 or 8 calls. I have to go back and look online, but it's after a certain number of calls in Hinds County. Every call after that doesn't count. So it's like you've reached a maximum capacity.
Right.
And so the other ones are just trying to get there when they get there. And so AMR has built these protections into the contract. The problem is that you might think, well, if we're not meeting the guidelines, why not make the contract easier to follow? Why not move the goalposts back a little bit?
Right.
I make it 65% of calls have to be on time. You're still not making it from what we saw, but it's maybe a little easier to hit. Or make the response times, instead of 8 minutes in Jackson, make it 12 minutes or 14 minutes.
Or could there not be another ambulance service to help supplement that? Would that not be something that could be done? Yeah. Have another, besides just AMR servicing Hinds County, have another ambulance service.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Now, there was a law that the first story we did, not this one that you just saw a part of, the first story we did last year got some lawmakers' attention, and they were able to change state law to make it, to basically establish that when you have areas that are only served by one ambulance service, like AMR, that when you have others that can step in and help, that they're now going to be required to let those other ambulance providers help.
Right.
Here's the catch. Existing contracts are grandfathered in. So AMR, this law that changed and took effect July 1st is great. It's progress. But it's not going to take effect in Hinds County until Hinds County and AMR sign their next contract, which I think is next year. So it's not going to help anybody right now. And it's not going to make those response times get better. AMR is the exclusive provider in Hinds County. And because of that, the contract itself is incredibly cheap. It is probably one of, if not the cheapest contracts for ambulance providers in the state of Mississippi. It costs about $32,000 for the county to have AMR as its provider. For a county of 250,000 people, $32,000.
The saying, you get what you pay for, comes to mind.
Well, AMR is making money. And I can say that because the reason why they subsidize it and charge so little for the county is because there are non-emergency calls like dialysis appointments, things like that are covered by insurance. Because AMR is the exclusive provider, they are the only game in town when it comes to providing those non-emergency transports. So they're getting that money. They're getting so much they can subsidize what the county has to pay, which is why the county's contract is so cheap.
Well, do we want to go ahead and play the second?
Yeah,
part?
I think, and I just want to set up. So we talked about in the first part about these response times and how that was going on. Now we're looking at the penalties, and we talked a little bit about that at the beginning. There are penalties in AMR's contract. We looked at 4 months. We went from November of 2023 to February of 2024. And we tried to see, based on the contract, how much AMR would have been fined or should have been fined by the county, and whether or not they would have been in breach. And so we'll share some of that with you, as well as some opinions from Clinton's mayor on this. AMR's contract gives Hinds County the power to take measures against the company if AMR fails to meet those response times. Once the company's response time rate falls below 85%, Hinds County is supposed to fine AMR $2,500 for every percentage point below that 85% threshold for every jurisdiction. Our analysis shows that would add up to nearly $1.4 million. The city of Clinton's share, which the county would have gotten, would be $452,000. The total would be almost $1.4 million for that 4-month stretch.
Well, I can tell you that if I could help them collect it and they gave me that $400,000, I'd be all over it today.
AMR's contract also says that if the company fails to meet response time requirements 3 months in a row, it constitutes an event of default, and either the company or the county would have to acknowledge that breach of contract. But there's no evidence the county has done that, even after we called those officials out last year for failing to penalize AMR over the last decade.
If both sides are just saying, well, let's don't worry about it, other than guaranteeing that AMR will be in the county, why are you here? I mean, what's the point of having a contract at all?
As a former Hinds County supervisor, what kind of a message do you think it sends to AMR when the county does not enforce a contract with them?
If I had a contract with the county and you're not going to enforce AMRs, why are you enforcing mine? And so the question I would ask the board in a public meeting is, why aren't we enforcing this?
Might make you wonder who in the county is supposed to do just that. Well, we're not really sure. We tried to ask Hinds County Board President Robert Graham that very question for weeks. Graham responded in a short statement saying he couldn't talk about AMR's response times because of ongoing litigation between the county, the company, and the city of Jackson. 3 on Your Side also contacted the county's emergency operations manager, Joey Perkins, more than a dozen times to see whether the county was aware these response times had gotten dangerously low. Perkins never responded.
Hey, how you doing?
So we showed up at his office.
I'm here to see Joey Perkins.
He's not here.
He's not here at all? Haven't been here this morning?
Yeah,
Okay. Does Joey Jameson working today?
he's on a call.
That leaves the other party to this contract, AMR.
There is definitely room for improvement.
Last year, AMR's operations manager, Ryan Wilson, sat down with us and acknowledged the company's response times were
It was below the expectation.
That far below?
We knew they were below the expectation.
Now we wanted to show the company that those rates have only gotten worse, in hopes officials there could explain why. But they eventually refused to talk too. We began contacting AMR's parent company, Global Medical Response, in September, 3 months ago. Spokesperson Kirsten Gurmendi responded weeks later, promising the opportunity for us to sit down with the company, but asked for our data first, even though all of it came from AMR. Garmendi told us the response time reports we got from the county were missing crucial pages, but declined to provide those to us when we asked for them. She also claimed that non-compliance we found doesn't mean the contract is in default, even though the contract clearly says it is. Once we reminded her that her communication could be used in this story, she sent one final email canceling any interview, saying, "At this time, we are unable to provide further comment."
If you provide ambulatory service in the city, in the county, then we need you there. We need you on time.
Jackson Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba would not say what the city's next steps might be. Last year, the city of Jackson began steps to implement its own ambulance service, but ended up being sued by Hinds County because AMR's contract with the county forbids cities in that county from going with somebody else.
Your tax dollars pay for AMR to serve Hinds County exclusively.
That's right.
You feel you're getting your money's worth?
The last 2 times, no. I'd have had a bad experience with them. If I can get you in my car, my truck, I ain't finna call. I'll take my chance getting the ticket coming down the highway. Because, like I said, every minute counts.
That's so true. Every minute does count there. Let's talk about the $1.4 million in fines.
Yeah.
So they're not meeting their contractual obligations. So they should be getting fined.
They should be getting fined. And the way this works, and again, we just looked at 4 months. Imagine if we had a full year.
1.4 million for 4 months.
Well, so, okay. In the first month of noncompliance, they're not fined. It's in the second month of noncompliance. So those figures represent what they would have been fined, because we looked at November of last year to February this year. Would have been starting in December, the fines, January, February, added up to $1.395 million. Wow. And so if you look over the course of a year, unless they went above that 85% to kind of reset the clock, we're talking probably millions of dollars, and potentially. And the county has not, the last time we did this story and we talked to AMR, we talked to the county, they had not fined them at least in the last decade. I don't know if they had. And so if they have, the county's not produced any evidence to us. We asked them specifically this time around if they could provide us any information showing that they had fined or held this company accountable. They did not provide that.
And how long has AMR been the ambulance provider for Hinds County? Do you know that?
I think since the 90s.
Since the 90s.
Since the 90s, yeah. So some of these comments are interesting. And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good.
I think from Kim, I think it's, so Kim says a couple things. One, AMR is not totally to blame. And the second one, on any given day, 10 to 12 AMR teams are holding the walls up in the ER at UMC. Now, this is what we talked about earlier, called wall time. AMR estimated last year that wall time was about 47 minutes on average that somebody was waiting there. Now, granted, when you're supposed to respond on time in 8 minutes, 47 minutes is well past that. And to Kim's point, those are some very serious considerations. But knowing that that's out there, the company could still say, let's reduce our response times. Let's say we can get anywhere in Jackson in 15 minutes. Let's lower the percentage that's required to respond on time. Why would you have an almost impossible to reach threshold and keep that going, knowing that these wait times at the hospitals are the way they are? And they know they are, because that information we got last year about the wall times came from AMR. So they know the waits.
Yeah.
So why not try to do something proactively with the contract so that it doesn't look like we're sitting here, we're footing a bill for service that's not fulfilling what was intended.
And it's much needed services. It's life or death type of services in a lot, or I say in a lot of situations, certain situations, it can be life or death. And we also want to say this, we are not pointing our finger at the paramedics and the EMT workers at all, because
it's a thankless job.
Yes, it really is. And so this is something that really is out of their control. This is the corporation that is failing Hinds County.
Well, it's a situation where you heard Phil Fisher talk about this and said, if you're not going to enforce a contract with AMR, then why would you enforce one if I have one with the county?
Right.
And so it makes you wonder why it's not being enforced. And it makes you wonder why the county is continuing to accept either way, it looks bad. Either the county knows these times are just as bad as we're seeing, these percentages, and they're just not doing anything about it. Or if the county doesn't know and they're supposed to be checking them and holding them accountable, it's even worse. So we don't know the answer because the county won't talk to us. Robert Graham, the supervisor and the president of the board of supervisors, said that this was because of litigation. The litigation revolves around response times. Doesn't say anything about the county's failure to find them.
Right.
Doesn't say anything about the county's obligations under the contract. So the fact that the county says that and says, oh, well, this is about response times, we can't talk about it. If they wanted to address how AMR should be functioning here and how the contract should be handled by the county, they could give us something. I would think they could. And maybe after this story, since we called out the county last year,
right,
maybe we'll see some progress here. What I hope, and I think Anthony, my colleague, we both worked really hard on this. We want to see a difference. And, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if the answer is AMR reducing its obligations. I don't think it just automatically becomes better if you hire more. AMR couldn't even tell us officially how many ambulances they even have for the entire county.
Really?
I don't think they wanted to. I mean, they did not want to disclose that information. And so you wonder how many ambulances are we getting? What are we getting our money's worth? Are we getting what we're supposed to be getting?
Is there in the contract, is there a required number of ambulances that they are supposed to have? Do you know that?
Do what now?
Is there a required amount of ambulances that they're supposed to have per contract?
The contract doesn't specify a number, no. And that's different from other contracts. So Rural Rapid Response is a private company that is the ambulance provider for Franklin County, Meadville, that area, which is about 30 minutes outside of Natchez. I can't remember what their current contract states, but I know that some of these contracts that we've looked at, including from Rural Rapid Response and others, actually will specify in the contract how many ambulances that area gets. Now, not all these ambulance contracts with counties have response time requirements.
Right.
If AMR took those out, they wouldn't be in violation because it wouldn't even be there. But but
then would there still be checks and balances in place to be able to know whether or not that they are responding within an appropriate amount of time? Then?
Well, if you take the response time requirements out of the contract, then the county has no accountability, cannot hold them accountable for that because they're not. And I'm not saying that's what needs to happen here, but something needs to improve.
Right.
Because when you're in a situation where 1 in 4 ambulances in Clinton and Byram, only 1 in 4 arrive on time.
It's scary.
It potentially could be. And so already more than half the calls are exempted from consideration, meaning that more than half these calls that come through aren't even counted against AMR because of various reasons, many of which people are talking about as far as when there's too many calls out at once.
Right.
And there's other things happening. Multiple unit emergencies, multiple unit responses, things like that, system overload. Those aren't counted. And
it's understandable for those not to be counted towards them because, I mean, if you think about the traffic and the construction that's happening on I-55 right now, if they get caught in that, it is outside of their control. And so it makes perfect sense for those things to not count against them. But even saying that, the response time should be better.
We had a comment near the top from, I'm trying to think of his name, gentleman who said something about, Marshall Robinson said that they use the times that the local fire department arrives because they start EMS services to the patient. I appreciate Marshall saying that. From what we've looked at, and we've looked at these reports, we didn't find that was the case. We actually, the way these reports read is that, I mean, it literally has on the far right side, it has all these numbers. It's a jumble of stuff and it's hard to navigate. That's a whole other thing. But toward the end, it says this deviation column, which tells you how far past the response time requirement they are. And if there's nothing in that, it means they're on time. If there's a deviation of a minute to 2 minutes, it's a light color. And if it's dark, it's past 2 minutes. It's even worse. And so from what it looks like, from the information the county has given us, once AMR is dispatched is when that clock starts.
Right.
Sometimes they'll have a sprinter go ahead of them and arrive first. And it's an AMR employee. It's not really in an ambulance. It's in a sprinter vehicle. And even though that's technically not an ambulance, and even though that technically kind of allows them to get there quicker and shave off response time, those still count for the company. Our response time percentages we shared with you, take that into consideration. So imagine if they didn't have those sprinters out there.
Right.
Imagine if they didn't have that stuff. And so we haven't seen any evidence that they're using the actual fire department response times, because what we're seeing is fire departments that come out to respond to these incidents are helping to bridge the gap between when an accident happens and AMR gets there. And what happens is you have Clinton firefighters and Jackson firefighters, again, people that you pay for if you live in these areas. You're paying their salaries with your tax dollars. And we're using our tax dollars for them to show up and help when, frankly, AMR should already be there.
Exactly.
So, we're paying extra for overtime for these guys to go out there and cover and respond in cases where the ambulance provider is not getting there on time.
And let's also talk about, this isn't fair to the citizens of Hinds County who pay for this, who require ambulance services. It's not fair to them. It's also not fair to the first responders.
That's right.
It's not fair to them because they are working these overtime, going to these horrific situations in some accounts, when you hear of, people getting shot and things like that, they're going and responding to these horrific situations. It's not fair to them to not be able to do their jobs effectively.
The worst thing, and we heard this when we were doing the first story, and I completely agree with this. The worst thing you can call someone who's a paramedic or EMT is an ambulance driver, because that undercuts so much of what they actually do, so much about their training, so much of what they don't just get behind the wheel and drive a big bus. That is hardly what that does not encapsulate even a small percentage of what they do. These folks help make the difference between life and death for so many people. And they're not paid what they deserve, and they're working crazy hours, and the stress level is unimaginable for me and you, and the things that they have to see, any kind of first responder has to see. And so I take no pleasure in putting out that these response times are worse, but it is the company's responsibility.
It is. It's the company and it's the county's responsibility that is paying for this contract for the company.
That's right. That's right. Now, to Carol said, hold the ERs accountable as well. There have been measures from the state to try to make this happen. She says, hold the ERs accountable as well. There's no reason to hold the wall for 30 plus minutes when there are clearly empty rooms. And that is true too. It's a multifaceted problem. The hospitals, whether it's for staffing or whatever, don't always open up all the rooms they have. And so you have folks that are waiting unnecessarily. And that wait for a lack of resources, whether the hospital is just trying to save money or doesn't have the bodies to staff those rooms, then rolls downward to EMS, emergency medical services. And so it is a multifaceted problem.
And which means that the solution is also multifaceted. There's no easy solution.
No, the state has tried as terms of with wall times and stuff. And of course, we're working on follow-ups right now to look and see what the state's doing. And,
here, I'm so sorry, but this is a good response here. And although we don't have any proof of it, but people don't understand, they have governors on the ambulance. They can only drive so fast as well. And that could be very well true too.
That's a good point from Amy. That's right. I wouldn't doubt that at all. School buses do for the same reason. School buses can only go so fast.
Truck drivers have it.
That's right. So you can't. Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, these companies, and we go back to the ERs, but I can't absolve the company completely, because the company keeps track of these wall times. The company, to Carol's point, keeps track of how long these ambulance providers have to wait at the hospitals. If they weren't monitoring it, I could see, well, okay, we don't really even know. It's just a lot. But they're actually tracking it. So they know how detrimental it is. And to know it's that detrimental and to still have a contract with a county that you know you can't meet is something else entirely.
Right. Right. It is scary.
Yeah.
It is scary. Will a solution come? Hopefully one day, hopefully this will improve, whether it be cutting into profits. Just like you said, if
Yeah.
you're not able to hold up your end of the contract, then why are you keeping the terms of the contract the same?
Yeah.
Whether that be on the county's part or on AMR's part, on both parties' part.
Yeah.
Something has got to change, because it could be life or death situation for so many people.
Ryan Wilson, AMR's operations manager. Again, AMR did not talk to us for this latest story, but he did sit down with us for the story last year. And Ryan told us that the county is within its right to fine them, but if they did, it would impact their business. Oh, almost certainly.
Yes.
It might. I mean, I'm not going to say it would bankrupt AMR, but it would not make it profitable for them to be in Hinds County. Because again, just from the 4 months that we looked at and the 3 months that they would have been fined, that's almost $1.4 million. Last year, we looked at 3 or 4 months worth. We said that the fines were around $800,000. The reason why the fines are more now is because the rates are lower. They're responding less. Their response rate is worse. It's less effective.
Yeah.
And when you're penalized $2,500 for every percentage point below 85, if you come in at 20%, you can do the math on that and think it's a lot of money. And so, how do we handle this? How do we deal with it? And if you bankrupt AMR, what are you doing? Because then you don't have anybody.
Right.
So there has to be a solution. The city has not filed anything recently to show that it's going to try to get its own ambulance service again, the city of Jackson. But with a response time rate of 37%, I mean, you can't blame them for wanting to look at other solutions, because they're kind of trapped by the county. The county has agreed to this, but the cities of Clinton, Jackson, and Byram are forced to use that because the county agreed to it, because everybody's within the county. So they have no say. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in court. And that's probably where we're going to start to see something before we actually see any kind of tangible change in these numbers. I think we're going to start to see things in court, and whether that's from this disagreement between the county and the city, or this wrongful death suit from the family of Jim Mavis.
Yes. Well, so there we have it. We have presented the numbers with you, or to you rather. Hopefully there can be some positive change implemented one way or the other in this. And we will continue to follow this. I know CJ will definitely continue to follow this. And if we have any updates, we will bring them to you.
We will. I want to add one thing. This is something we didn't actually have in the story. Had to cut it for time. So the last time we did this last year, we got these reports. It was pretty easy to look because the reports were like for the individual jurisdictions. So you had reports that were just for Clinton, just for Byram, just for Jackson, just for rural Hinds County. And they were just like, each report was like for that day. And they were sorted by priority. It was very easy to go through. From the time we did that report to the time we asked for numbers after our report aired, our first one, what AMR sends the county now is much harder to read. It's much harder to decipher the response times. From these individual daily reports, now they give one report for 1 month is about 63 pages.
Wow.
And it's all for 4 jurisdictions added together. You have to pick them out and figure out where. They're not sorted by priority. You have to sit there and pick all that out too. The way we did this, Anthony and I, took days, and we went through, we had like a little piece of paper, and we just did tally marks every time we counted one that was past the response time, or one that was on time. We did it the old-fashioned way and had to count those up, because it appeared that the company was not giving us information in a way, or giving the county information in a way that allowed it to be held accountable. I'd love for the company to talk about that, but they're not.
Yes.
So
maybe they will. Hopefully, AMR, if you are watching, please reach back out to CJ or Anthony, and hopefully be willing to sit down and talk, explain more.
I'd love to know it. And I think, when we were going back and forth with that woman who was their PR person, and she kept wanting us to give her our data beforehand, which is data that they have. It's their own response time stuff. And I'm thinking, why not just talk to us? And if you disagree with our numbers, tell us that in the interview.
Yeah.
Say you're wrong. Our numbers are actually this. We would show it. We would use that. But to not even sit down with us or to act like you want to give us an interview and then back out. I had hoped that they would. Now, maybe that decision could be made because they're in litigation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that maybe that could have been the smartest decision for them. But I'm hopeful that they will still sit down and talk with us. And I hope that will happen at some point because the taxpayers of Hinds County deserve answers.
They do. They really do. Well, guys, that is going to be it for WLBT Plus today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're back here at 2:30 today. Our First Alert weather team is going to be here to let you know what the forecast is going to be for old St. Nick. He will be here next week. I cannot believe Christmas is already next week.
Yeah.
Are you done
a week
shopping?
from today. I have one more that I have to get for. Well, I have to get something for another relative. I'm not going to call them out on air. But I have one more thing I have to get, but most of it is done.
Mine is still in the process of being delivered through Amazon. I'm really hoping the strike that was announced today does not affect it. I'm hoping my kids will take IOUs and pictures of receipts for Christmas if they don't arrive, but we'll see. Anyway, we will be back tomorrow, or I'll be back tomorrow at 1:00 for WLBT Plus. And again, make sure you tune into our newscast tonight. You can download the First Alert weather app for all of your up-to-date weather information and the WLBT News app. You can get notifications on breaking news as it comes into us. And you can also watch all of our newscasts there, whether it be live as they're happening, or you can watch them later on demand, as well as all of the stories that we do and all the stories that this man right here does for us here at WLBT. You guys have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.